Hola, bienvenidos y bienvenidas a una nueva edición de entrevistas a expositores de Congreso Futuro 2025. Y en esta ocasión me acompaña Elmias Kebrab. Es profesor de Ciencia Animal en la Universidad de California, reconocido por su trabajo en sostenibilidad y nutrición animal. Sus investigaciones han sido pioneras en el desarrollo de estrategias para mitigar el impacto ambiental de la producción ganadera mediante cambios dietéticos en los animales. Muchísimas gracias, Elmias, por aceptar esta invitación. Welcome.
Thank you for
Elmias,
having me.
how are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Yeah, it's your first time participating in Congreso Futuro, right?
Yes, for Congreso Futuro, this is my first time.
And your first time in Chile as well?
No, in Chile, I don't know, 5, 6 times maybe.
Oh.
I usually come here once a year.
You're local by now.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for accepting this invitation to talk with us about your research. We know that your research focuses a lot of in terms of mitigating greenhouse
Emissions.
Thank you, through the change in the dietary changes in livestock. But could you tell us more about what you're doing right now?
Yeah, so what we're trying to do is to try to come up with a way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from livestock systems. So one of the contributing factor to global greenhouse gas emission is livestock production in different ways, particularly from ruminants. So ruminants, like cattle and sheep and goats, they have a specialized stomach that helps them digest fiber, but at the same time, the byproduct is methane, and that methane is belched out into the atmosphere. And so what we're trying to do is different ways to try to reduce the greenhouse gas emission, particularly the methane emission coming from ruminants.
It's interesting because, like you said, most of the greenhouse emissions came from livestock. So in some terms, most of what people believe is that we should only stop, or one way to cut that is us to stop consuming meat, for example, in order to cut out the emissions. But there's other options, right? So your research is focused on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So there was a recent analysis done by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, and they looked at what are the ways in which we are able to reduce the emissions. And as you said, dietary changes could be one way to do that, and according to their analysis, we will get a 6% reduction. So it's only 6% reduction by changing our strategy, by changing our dietary habits to have lesser amount of animal source food, which is good. I think people who are over consuming animal source food definitely need to lower their intake. I think that's one way of doing that. But animal source food are important for our health, and they contain really ideal protein. You know, if you think about what's the amino acid profile for protein, egg is the standard. It's the gold standard is egg. So everything is compared to the fatty acid, the protein profile, right? So we need animal source food, but we need to be responsible in the way that we consume them. So we consume them according to our requirements. So that's, as I said, 6%. So we have a number of other things that we can do to help us reduce emissions, and it could be improvement in productivity. It could be using feed additives that we've been working on, or it could be breeding. So we have those different things that we can do in order to get to a level where it's going to be more acceptable.
And in your opinion, what are the most promising things that we're research right now?
Yeah, so in terms of research, we have some feed additives that are really promising. I mean, one of them actually is already approved. It was approved, the first time it was approved was in Chile and in Brazil.
Oh, great.
So yeah, so this feed additive, and then it was approved in the European Union. And then it was approved like last January in Canada and last May in the United States. Now 65 countries, more than 65 countries have approved the use of this feed additive. And it's probably the most studied feed additive, about 80, 90 different publications on this feed additive. And when we looked at sort of in totality all these studies put together, we see maybe 25 to 30% reduction in emissions. So by using this, it's a very small quantity. You just put it a handful into the diet on a daily basis. You mix with the diet, and you can get 25 to 30% reduction in emissions. So as I said, this is now an approved product. The company that's producing this have already built a factory in Scotland, and I'm sure they will build somewhere else also, so that as the demand increases, and I think it's already used here in Chile. And then other. So this is one way that we can use this additive that's already provided. But there are a number of others that we've been working that could be even more effective. So we're working with seaweed, for example. Seaweed is particularly one seaweed, Asparagopsis taxiformis, has the ability to reduce the emissions in some cases up to 98%. I've seen a paper from Australia. They reported 98% reduction. And we did this work in University of California. We saw up to 80% reduction, depending on the diet. There's the effect of diet, but we saw maybe between 50 to 80% reduction in emissions. So this is using seaweed, specific seaweeds. And some others, what are they doing is they are identifying, so we know what the main ingredients, the active ingredients of this. And some people, what are they doing? Some companies are taking the chromoform, the active ingredient, stabilizing it, and then instead of cultivating the seaweed, they can actually just give them that compound. So obviously it's synthetically done, and we looked into that, and we did some work recently, and we saw up to 90% reduction just using the synthetic compound as well. So those are the things that are really in the research. We need a little bit more research to make sure that it does not have an impact on the environment, on the animals, and then the products are safe to eat for humans. So we need to do this work, but the potential is there.
Great. It's really interesting because sometimes we think that nothing has been done in order to reduce, and also with quality of life, not just for us humans, but also for the animals and for the cattle that is consuming these additives, or these food additives. But well, we're at the TV of the Senate, and I would like to ask, because it's not only a matter of the advances of the technology that we're creating, but also how the legislation and other actors that take part of those advancements to get these results. So in your opinion, what role should governments and leaders to take in order to create more of these green solutions?
Yeah, I think the government has a huge role to play. And like in California, for example, we have a legislation to reduce methane emissions by 40% by 2030. So we only have 5 years left now. And so in 5 years, we have to get to 40% reduction in methane emissions. And to go with that, there are some incentives that are providing. So there are some funds available for farmers to be able to compensate it when they use this. Because the fact of the matter is that when you use those feed additives, you may not get a productivity gain. So it's cost. It will add cost to the farmer. So through legislation, through incentives, the government, local government or the federal government are able to incentivize the use of this for farmers. So you can offer some sort of incentives to do that. Denmark, for example, is doing that. Denmark have started this year. They have made a rule that everybody, all farmers, they have to use additives from the 1st of January, and the government will give them subsidies, some incentives to be able to use that. So I think that way you can really incentivize. I think once it becomes commonplace, then it's fine. But to begin with, you need to give it a bit of a push so that it does that. Hopefully the market will take over, because the best way to do that is for the amount of carbon, the cost of carbon, to be at a level where when you're using these feed additives, it becomes more profitable for farmers. Right now, the cost of carbon is very variable depending where you are. In Europe, it's about 80 euros per ton of carbon, which is good, and you can use feed additives, and you can pay for the feed additive by selling carbon. In US right now, voluntary maybe about $30 a ton, so it's not a lot. But in regulatory markets like in the California, you could get up to $150 per ton of carbon. Now at that level, it becomes very, people are incentivized to actually use it because you'll be able to buy the feed additive, use it, and then sell the carbon so that you can actually make money, and you will be incentivized to include those feed additives in your additive. So yes, the government at all levels, local levels or state levels and at federal levels have a big role to play.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You mentioned there's always this curve, right? That at the beginning could be more or not that cheap, but as the technology is used and this food additive will be used, then there's a change.
Yes.
So Ermias, let's go take a break,
okay.
And we're coming back to talk more about this new food and solutions.
Fantastic. Okay.
Hacemos una pausa y volvemos con Ermias Quebreab. Bienvenidos y bienvenidas de vuelta a esta sección de entrevistas para los expositores de Congreso Futuro 2025. En esta ocasión estoy con Ermias Quebreab. Permítame contarles un poquito más acerca de su trabajo porque aborda uno de los mayores desafíos actuales de la agroindustria y explora innovaciones en nutrición del ganado para poder reducir los gases de efecto invernadero. Welcome back, Ermias. How are you?
Thank you very much.
Well, livestock production is often criticized, as we mentioned earlier, as one of the most contaminated industries, right? Right now. But I would like to ask you, how can we reframe the conversation to highlight the opportunities that this industry having to fight climate change and to reduce carbon emissions?
So I mean, if you look at the livestock industry, the contribution is variable. Globally, is around 10 to 15%, depending on how it's calculated. 10 to 15% is where you are in terms of emissions. So yes, it has an impact, but importantly, the reason we kind of focus on this is because of methane. Methane gas is very potent but only lives for a short period of time in the atmosphere. So if we are able to reduce methane right now, then we can get this accelerated benefits because in 10 years, we will have a much better response in terms of temperature than you do with carbon dioxide. Because carbon dioxide, even if you start with zero carbon dioxide right now, it stays in the atmosphere for a long period of time. So the benefits are going to be much more longer term. While in methane, the benefits are shorter. So that's why we're focusing on methane issues, not just from livestock, but from others. But if you look at where does methane, particularly anthropogenic methane, come from, is the oil and gas industry and then the livestock industry. So that's where we were focusing to reduce methane emissions.
Great. It's always a good news that emerged for this. And your work bridges science and practical applications, right? You always between those spaces. So how can collaboration between researchers, farmers, and policymakers could accelerate the adoption of new technology and new application of what you're doing?
Yeah, I think it's very important to work together. I think it's important for farmers to understand what's going on, what kind of innovations are happening, because they will know whether this kind of technologies will be able to be implemented on farm or not. Because if you are developing innovations that will necessitate a big change in the way that farmers are operating, then it's not going to become feasible. So before you start, you really have to talk with the farmers and say, okay, this is what we were thinking, and you have to come up with a solution that does not fundamentally change the way farmers are feeding their animals, right? So right now you have, especially in dairy cattle, we have a total mixed ration, and you can if you have something that you can just add to it, then it's a lot better for the farmers to be able to pick it up. The same thing with policymakers. Policymakers also need to work with researchers and farmers because you need to know what is feasible, right? So you can come up and say, well, we can, if you have a policy, we want to reduce 70%, and then you don't have any ways of reducing that, then it's a problem. It just becomes unnecessary burden to the farmers, and there's no way to achieve that goal. So it needs to be a dialogue between farmers and researchers and policymakers to find out, okay, what's feasible? What can we do in the next 10 years, in the next 5 years? What is feasible? At what level can we do that? And then do we have ways to achieving that? And what do we need? And then in terms of investment, as I talked in California, it's not just the 40% reduction, but the government has also incentives to achieve that. California built a lot of digesters, for example, to reduce methane emissions. Before this legislation, in California there were like 10, 15 maybe digesters for the whole state. Now like 200 digesters, and that was all because of the investment. I think about $100 million was invested from the state to be able to do that. So this is all through the discussion with farmers, because you put the digester in a farmer's field, so you have to work with farmers, yeah. And the researchers will analyze and will tell you what is the reduction in emissions that is going to likely to come when you do that. So it's very important to have this collaboration and dialogue when you're trying to come up with solutions.
And what about the consumers? Is there something that us as consumers could do to enrich this?
Yeah, I think consumers should demand that the products are sustainable, so they are made in a sustainable way. I think it's good to have an information about what is the environmental burden of the food they are consuming, right? So you can say, this liter of milk that I am taking has 1 kilogram of carbon dioxide equivalent to make it, and then you can show by using the technologies that I was talking about, you can really reduce it. You can say, okay, now last year we were having 1 kilogram of CO2 per kilogram of milk. Now we are going half of that, or we're going 60% of that. So I think consumers would really push the agenda to make sure that they are eating products that's sustainably produced. And then obviously we talked about dietary changes. Sometimes there could be some dietary changes that need to happen. But I mean, they don't really give you a lot of reductions in emissions, but at least that is under the control of the consumer. As a consumer, you can choose what you eat. You can choose stuff that has been sustainably produced. So even if it is the same product, even if it is meat or milk, some are sustainably produced and some are not. So I think the consumers could push companies, big companies that are serving those things, like let's say McDonald's, or you have Starbucks, or all of those companies should be held accountable on the amount of emissions that is used in order to make those products.
Yeah, that's true. There's a lot of accountability.
Yeah.
And you think we're headed to a better or a slightly better situation today in terms of the industry?
Yeah, absolutely, because those big industries have made pledges. They have made commitments to reduce their emissions. They say they wanted to get to net zero by, some of them 2030, some of them 2040. It doesn't matter the year. There is a commitment. Those companies have made a commitment to get to net zero by a certain amount of year, and they have to show progress that they are doing this. And it's not just about commitment, but sometimes they are made accountable for that. There was recently one of the big companies, JBS, was sued by the New York government, and basically saying, well, you said you're going to reduce emission, but we didn't see that. You have to show us how you are achieving that. So it's not just about the commitment, but the accountability for that commitment as well.
Great. And just to finish this conversation, the theme of this year in Congreso Futuro is what humanity we would like to become, or we would like to be. Mm-hmm. And I would like to do the same. What humanity you think or you wish we will become?
Well, I think from my perspective, I wish that we would have our food systems to be more sustainable. So sustainably produced, we make sure that there's as much as few food waste and losses as possible happening, and we have more on a circular economy as well. So I hope that in the future we will have very close to net zero food production.
Thank you very much, and we hope to be able to achieve that in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you, and well, you need to prepare for your presentation, so
okay. All right.
Give me a moment.
Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias por acompañarnos en esta entrevista de Congreso Futuro 2025, ¿qué humanidad queremos ser? Hasta luego.